Destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone. There comes a moment so quiet, so haunting that most people miss it. A moment when the reflection in the mirror no longer matches the soul behind the eyes. You do not know when it began, this unraveling of self. Maybe it was a compromise too small to notice. Maybe it was the accumulation of years spent pleasing, pretending, proving. But now, here you are, half awake, half alive. The smile is functional, the ambition recycled, the routines numbing, and the truth whispers your life is not yours anymore. You have become a version of yourself that was built on survival, not sovereignty, on safety, not strength, on pleasing the world, not protecting your soul, and that version must die. I wrote this book not for the crowd, not for the strong, not for the ones who never doubted. I wrote it for the hidden, for the ones who are still smiling on the outside while silently negotiating their worth, for the ones who built a life that no longer fits, who feel like they are living a story they never meant to write. I wrote it for the ones who are done pretending and ready to begin again, but not with applause, not with a new tribe, with nothing, with silence, with solitude, with the sacred decision to destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone. Most people never get that far. They patch their wounds with distraction. They coat their discontent with surface wins. They chase pleasure and call it freedom. But eventually, the void returns, and the truth becomes unavoidable. You can no longer decorate the cage. You must leave it. You must burn what you've outgrown. You must let the version of you that they applauded die, so the version of you that is authentic can rise. This is the core of the book, and the only thing that matters. Destruction is not failure. It is faith. Faith that what you truly are is deeper than what you have performed. Faith that solitude will not kill you, it will reveal you. Faith that the old identity, no matter how functional, no longer serves the becoming. The philosophy is simple. You were not born to stay acceptable. You were born to become undeniable. But to do that, you must be willing to be unseen, uncelebrated, uncomfortable. You must go into the desert of your own soul and listen without distraction. Tear down every borrowed belief. Rip up the floorboards of your false self. Expose the rot. Sit with the ruins. And from that raw place you build again, brick by breath, silence by strength. No one watching, no one clapping. Just you and the decision to finally reclaim your name. You will lose people. You will disappoint expectations. You will be called selfish, intense, distant, cold. But understand this. That is the cost of freedom. That is the tax of authenticity. And those who cannot handle your healing never loved you, only your performance. So this is not a guide. It is a reckoning. It is not a motivational speech. It is a call to burial, to the death of the version of you who served survival, to the funeral of the one who faked normal, the one who built dreams on fear, the one who laughed when they wanted to scream. That one must go, because the world does not need more nice people who are dying inside. It needs people who have gone into the fire and come out with clarity. It needs you, not the version you curated, but the version you created in silence. This book will not flatter you. It will break you, and then it will rebuild you, alone. And from that solitude you will rise, not soft but solid, not loud but certain, not fast but free, and your life once again will be yours. Chapter 1. The uncomfortable truth of collapse. There is a collapse that hides behind success, a collapse that visits you not in failure but in advancement. You climb the ladder, tick off the checklist, post the highlights. Yet inwardly, something shrinks. You wake up quieter. You feel less seen even when you are most visible. And in that very success, you recognize the old self has faltered. You realize stability you built held everything, but it could not hold you. That is the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the roof needs to come crashing down before your roots dare reach the light. That facade must fall before your foundation can grow. And only when everything external collapses do you finally feel the permission to destroy what you carried for others and rebuild what you must carry for yourself. Most people avoid this moment. They patch cracks with performance. They numb heaviness with applause. They believe comfort is safe even as it suffocates their clarity. But the soul demands collapse when the life you built is no longer yours. If you will ignore it long enough, it becomes a war inside you, a war between what you have become and who you are meant to be. That war breaks through not in noise, but in emptiness. Maybe engagements dry up. Maybe your ambition fades. Maybe the usual routines feel hollow. That is the invitation. That is the collapse talking. That collapse says you can live better, but you will die trying to hold the same version of you that never belonged. So you enter the wreckage, and you must say goodbye, not out of anger, but out of allegiance, to your future, to your freedom, to the you no longer willing to compromise your authenticity for acceptance. That version must die. You must let it. You must burn down your identity, built on others' approval, so the real identity can emerge. That death is not easy. It is lonely. It's not about not being enough, but about being too much for some chapters of your life. And some will walk away. Others will misunderstand, and that is the price of becoming. But know this, when you collapse the identity that depended on acceptance, you emancipate the one founded on truth. That is the difference between pain and purpose. Collapse hurts, but what rises from it is durable. It is sovereign. It is yours. More than that, it is real. You will not rebuild until you excavate the ruins of who you used to be. You must sit with that emptiness. You must walk inside it unprotected, unafraid, because safety is silently teaching you to stay small, and rebuilding demands risk. So you collect your courage. You mourn your old self, not to bury them in resentment, but to release them with love. Because love is the force that transforms decay into dust, into soil, into next growth. Do not seek recovery. Seek resurrection. The old self dying is not tragedy. The tragedy is denying the death. Saying yes to collapse is not failure. It's the first step of victorious becoming. So now, lean into the collapse. Accept the loss of your identity built on external structures, so you can regain the one built from silence. This is your threshold. You are not breaking down, you are breaking free. Now I ask you, what part of the old you are you ready to release, even if you lose applause for it? Write it in the comments, not to show strength, but to mark a beginning. If this chapter disturbed something you needed to feel, share it. Someone you know may be living as a version they outgrew years ago. Subscribe if you are committed to rebuilding from the ruins, not someday, but now. This collapse is not your defeat. It is your invitation. Chapter 2. The Psychology of Isolation and Solitude. There is a peculiar fear many of us carry, not the fear of being alone, but the fear of being seen alone. You fear the silence around you as much as the applause that once filled your soul. When you choose to rebuild alone, every mirror has to lean inside. Every voice turns inward, and every moment asks harder questions. Why am I here? What do I truly stand for? Who am I without every external symbol that once defined me? And this is where most people drown, not in failure, but in the terror of being authentic. They prefer the numbing routine, the identity built by others, the noise over the silence of self-confrontation. Solitude is not loneliness when you understand it is crucible. When the crowd fades, the illusions drop away. When familiar voices soften, you can finally hear the real one, your own. But you must choose that hearing. You must invite discomfort. You must let the part of you that seeks distraction fall silent. Only then does clarity rise. You walk inside your own mind without filters, without masks, and there experience liberation. Not because you gained something new, but because you came home to what you always had inside. Why is this so scary? Because isolation breaks dependency. It forces you to realize everything you built on echo dies on applause, on approval, on belonging. And when everything external fades, you must rely on your internal compass. That may seem weak at first, but it is strength. Because when external symbols can no longer speak for you, you speak for yourself. You speak truth you cannot back up with status. Your sentences shake until your posture straightens. You begin to trust what you think, not what others say. You are alone, but solid. The real cost of rebuilding alone is not on others leaving your scenes. The true cost is the version of you who depended on belonging. That version must die. It must take payment in discomfort, in shaking foundations. You will make decisions without a cheer squad. You will create breakthroughs without social confirmation. That is the work of solitude. And it is immensely lonely and absolutely necessary. But here is the promise hidden in the fear. When you choose solitude deliberately, you inherit sovereignty. You cease building by consent. You begin building by conviction. When no one is speaking it into you, you speak it out from you. When the room grows quiet, you become the echo of your own worth. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin to speak, act, and live from your own call, even when the world does not yet hear it. That is where the new identity is born. This is not heroic. It is real. It is raw. It is not about being harder or colder. It is about being truer. When you sit in silence, you may feel broken, but in that break, you become unbreakable. Because you are no longer curated. You are not performing. You are being. Here is a small but powerful practice. Pick one space in your life relationship schedule attention that you will empty of external validation for one day. No feedback, no posting, no audience. Spend the silence. Sit with tension. Listen to the voice that still speaks when no one else does. Take notes. Journal. Breathe through the emptiness. Come back again. This is not isolation for defeat. It is presence for rebirth. As you walk this path, know this. You will lose people. Some will fade. Others will ask you change. And that is not always rejection. Sometimes it is just recognition. Your energy changed. Let them go. Let the space be empty until your new you begins to move into it. Fill it with faith, not fear. Now I ask you, what part of your identity are you afraid to be without? Who will you become when no one cheers anymore? Are you willing to risk being unknown in exchange for being real? Write your answers in the comments, not to show strength, but to show sovereignty. Let this be the testimony of one who chose truth over comfort. If this chapter stirred you, share it. Someone you know may be defending the version of them they outgrew long ago. Subscribe if you are committed to destroying who you built from others and rebuilding yourself alone, not for applause, but for authenticity. Because greatness is not given, it is silently constructed. And remember, in the silence of solitude, your future finally learns how to speak. Chapter 3. The discipline of rebuilding in silence. There is a silence after destruction that feels almost unbearable. Not because it is painful, but because it is unfamiliar. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming. You are between versions, between stories, between worlds. This is not the moment people post on their highlight reels. This is the part no one talks about, the long, dull, holy stretch of nothing. The days where you wake up and question the point. The nights where your mind replays what you left behind, not out of regret, but because it was familiar. The hours spent alone doing the hard inner work without a whisper of encouragement. And it is here in this discipline of silence that your real transformation begins. Most people do not survive this stage. They run back to the version of themselves that at least made sense to others. They re-enter old habits just to feel the comfort of movement. They call the old relationship, rejoin the old crowd, resurrect the old identity, all because the emptiness frightened them. But growth is not always filled with signs. Sometimes the deepest breakthroughs come When nothing seems to be happening, you are not being punished, you are being reconstructed. And reconstruction does not require noise, it requires discipline. Discipline is not about control. It is about creation. It is what builds the structure for the new version of you to stand inside. When your world falls apart, what remains is what you truly believe. What you do in silence becomes who you are in public. And that is why this part of your journey matters more than any applause, any transformation photo, any external proof. Because when no one sees you, you are forced to see yourself. The world trains us to perform, to seek approval before we trust ourselves, to gather evidence before we choose belief. But when you rebuild alone, you flip the process. You believe first. You trust yourself before anyone validates it. You make the decision to act as the person you are becoming, even when you do not yet feel like them. This is the discipline of transformation, to be loyal to the future you, even when the present looks like failure. You will wake up on days and feel nothing changing, but the change is already happening beneath the surface. In the way you choose to stay instead of run. In the way you eat with intention. In the way you breathe when anxious thoughts creep in. In the way you say no to old patterns and yes to the unfamiliar silence. These are not small moments. These are spiritual renovations. Every time you hold your standard without applause, you are chiseling away the old. Every time you choose peace over performance, you are laying a new foundation. Every time you decline comfort for clarity, you are rewriting the rules of your reality. And yes, you will question yourself, often. You will feel the ache of rebuilding without a blueprint. You will feel foolish for believing this process leads anywhere at all. But keep going, because here's what happens when you do. Your capacity expands. You begin to trust your inner voice more than the world's volume. You begin to build not from urgency, but from peace. You stop needing validation to believe in your worth. You stop searching for mirrors and become one. You start to notice how powerful you are when no one is watching. How dangerous you become when you do not need to be rescued. How solid you are when solitude becomes your sanctuary, not your sentence. Rebuilding in silence is not glamorous. It is sacred. It is the soil where all great identities are born. Every powerful, self-possessed soul you admire has spent seasons in that quiet room building, weeping, breathing, becoming. There is no shortcut through this, no hack, no permission slip, only practice, only presence, only one breath after another. You are not being buried, you are being planted, and you do not need to rush your rise. This process demands reverence, not force. You are not late, you are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be, unseen, uncomfortable, and becoming undeniable. So keep showing up. For your vision, for your peace, for the version of you who is still learning how to breathe without asking permission. That version is not weak. They are waking up. They are learning how to walk with silence as a friend, not a threat. They are choosing to become not for the crowd, but for the calling. Now ask yourself, what small act can I commit to daily that serves the next version of me even when no one sees it? Answer that in the comments. Write it not to impress, but to anchor yourself in the discipline of daily transformation. And if this chapter touched something sacred inside you, share it. Someone out there is mistaking stillness for failure, and they need this truth. Silence is not the end. It is the forge. Subscribe if you are done performing and ready to build from stillness. Because when you rebuild yourself alone, you do not just become stronger, you become unshakable. Chapter 4. Reconstructing your inner blueprint. Your mind is the unseen architect of your life. After the collapse amidst the silence, everything depends on this hidden blueprint. It is not drawn from your past successes, nor inherited from external expectations. It is born in solitude, in choice, in the deep conviction that if you destroy your old life, you must reconstruct your inner world. If your structure is shaky, your identity will fracture again. So this chapter is not about simply adjusting habits, but redesigning your spiritual DNA. It begins with three fundamental truths. Your future self must be consciously envisioned, diligently rehearsed, and relentlessly protected. Vision is not enough if it remains imagination. You must translate inner conviction into daily rules. You write them not to conform, but to anchor your becoming. Each morning you prime your mind with declarations rooted in truth, not affirmations that fake motivation, but declarations that shape identity. I speak truth even when it costs silence. I choose pain over pretend. I build what I envision, not what I tolerate. These words are your mental scaffolding. They do not need applause. They need repetition, because the blueprint you repeat in solitude determines the structure you build in life. But vision alone without rehearsal is sterile. You must craft a training ground. It begins in routines aligned with the version of you who already stands. Wake before comfort beckons. Eat to fuel, not fill. Speak your purpose quietly to yourself. There will be pressure to return to ambiguity, to excuse inaction by saying you're still lost. Do not. You have direction. You know you are rebuilding. Practice the discipline now, not for completion, but for clarity. Sometimes the blueprint requires excavation. You must tear down limiting beliefs one by one. I am only as valuable as others say. I need the audience to feel alive. I cannot survive unmirrored. Those beliefs were bricks once placed in the mindset of survival. But good architecture demands dismantling rot before building fresh beams. So you excavate quietly. Ask, why does this still feel true? When did I adopt this as identity? Write the lie on one side of the page with its weight, and then write the reality you are choosing. Compare daily. Replace new narratives repeatedly. That is reprogramming. That is reconstruction. You will face internal resistance. It sounds like doubt. It feels like lethargy. It whispers you are not enough. You will entertain distractions. Old habits will pull. Familiar voices may say rebuilding is too much, that you're radical or isolated, that you have gone too far. Know this resistance is the perfect measure of growth, not convenience, not applause. Growth demands friction between the old blueprint and the new. Friction is not failure, it is ignition. You persist, because your identity now is forged in quiet rain, not external reward. A vivid example, someone laced into leadership quietly, yet unshakably, who knew what they believed, and lived it in private, not for performance. Their world did not explode spectacularly. It changed beneath the surface in small decisions. Their internal script rewrote what they tolerated, then their external environment responded. Doors opened to alignment, not accident. People followed without ceremony, not because they idolized presence, but because they trusted presence. That is the architecture of identity aligned with vision. Practical application. Map your inner blueprint tonight. Write 5 declarations of becoming. 5 early habits your future self embodies. 5 boundaries you refuse to negotiate. Then memorize them silently. Before bed, before phone, before validation. Awaken them daily with prayer breath, solitude. Let them be your architecture, ones that no storm can dismantle. And commit public accountability. Share 1 built value and 1 boundary. You are reinforcing live, not to broadcast, but to anchor yourself. Then track it daily. Journal how it shaped your speech, your mood, your energy. Because discipline needs reflection. Vulnerability needs consistency. I want to ask you, what is the most non-negotiable value your new self will be built on? What boundary will you uphold even if it scares others? And which small daily habit will you begin today to align mind, body, and soul? Write it in the comments, not as hope, but as internal instruction. If this chapter stirred something inside you, if you feel tired of saving the old you and ready to construct the version you were meant to be, share it. Someone you know is building on borrowed identity when they could build on their own. Subscribe if you are done building by approval and ready to be the architect of your own becoming. Because when you rebuild yourself alone, you rebuild your life for promise, not for permission. Chapter 5. The Fire-Tested Identity. Written as one rich, unbroken narrative full of emotional honesty and practical insight. There will come a moment in your solitary reconstruction when you stand before a metaphorical fire. This fire doesn't burn your flesh, but scorches your inner structure. It is not the collapse of identity, but the test of identity. It might be a conversation you dread, a decision someone expects you to make, or an early act of honesty when everyone else still favored silence. In that moment, you will discover something deeply necessary. Who you have rebuilt so far is only authentic if it can stand heat. If your truth retreats under pressure, it was never yours. So if you mean to destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, you must make peace with fire. Because only what can live in flames can become steel. Most people believe identity is soft. That truth is bendable. That authenticity is what you speak when it's easy. But not here, not anymore. The identity you are forging now must bear the weight of tension, criticism, isolation, unresolved expectation, rejection. These are not complications, they are your crucible. They are what reveal whether your foundation is superficial or deep. And make no mistake, the world will not wait to test you once you step off the old scaffolding. It will demand proof. It will offer temptation. It will question your resolve. And in that testing, your new identity must say, I am unshakable because I built myself upon conviction, not comfort. Consider the oak that grows by fire, not in spite of it. The flames clear away the brambles, but the tree stands. It is deeper rooted for having weathered the heat. You too must become that. Every time old friends question your new boundaries, every time someone expects you to fit the old version of yourself, every time your clarity irritates someone else's comfort, the fire arrives. Now you choose, do you bend smoke or do you stand firm? Do you compromise your becoming or do you let the fire purify you? That choice defines the difference between becoming someone you admire and reverting into the one you escaped. The psychology of transformation is not decoration, it is discipline. It is not an inside job that ends with feeling good. It is a steady rebirth that begins with discomfort. You must train for tension. You must rehearse truth in small moments, so when your big test arrives, you do not hesitate. When someone violates a standard you set, you enforce it not out of aggression, but out of integrity. When rejection comes, you continue building not because you are numb, but because you understand rejection was the price for clarity. Your identity then becomes sacred, not hidden, not fragile, but fenced. Not because you reject connection, but because you respect what you are constructing. This does not make you unkind. It makes you choiceless, no longer swayed by the tides of reaction. You speak truth, even when it costs a reader, a friend, a follower, because your allegiance is to your becoming, not someone else's convenience. But this is not a rule book. It is not rigid or unfeeling. It is fierce and aligned. You are not building a fortress. You are building a temple. And it is so personal that every flame you walked through becomes holy ground. You no longer explain your boundary because it is now self-evident in your posture. You no longer defend your solitude because it is now sacred in your presence. That doesn't mean warmth doesn't return. People will circle back when they see your fire-tested insistence. Some relationships will mature. Spaces you once abandoned will invite you again. But you will return only if they now align on your terms, not theirs. And if they don't, you remain alone in silence, building with integrity. This is how the new identity becomes unshakable, by not begging permission, by not dissolving boundaries for comfort, by not inviting applause and not fearing absence. Now, a practical step: identify one area of your life where your new identity must stand when fire comes. Maybe it's saying no to a habit, a group, or even a paycheck that compromises your future self. Choose your boundary, name it internally, and rehearse the scenario. Visualize the pushback. Prepare your tone. Practice saying it out loud when no one is listening. Build the muscle of being unmoved by what cannot move your truth. I ask you now, what boundary are you now unwilling to cross? What choice will you no longer negotiate? And how do you reinforce that boundary, even if you lose everything you used to build? Write this in the comments not as bravado, but as clarity. This is your fuel. This is your claim. If this chapter stirred something fierce within you, share it. Someone is dangling compromise when they could be rising. Let them remember identity is forged in the fire, not the spotlight. Subscribe if you are done surviving your old image and ready to build an identity only the fire could define. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, you must become someone the fire cannot consume. Chapter 6. The Sanctuary of Solitude. There comes a time when rebuilding alone stops feeling like penance and becomes sanctuary. You realize that solitude is not your weakness. It is your stronghold. It is not punishment. It is pilgrimage. When you destroy the old you and go inward, you find a sanctuary inside yourself that no external tribe can replicate. It begins in the decision to stand alone until silence becomes sacred, not isolation for isolation's sake, but solitude as a sacred soil from which clarity grows. In the darkness of your own mind, you discover where your soul anchors not in what others applauded, but in the convictions that no longer require permission to exist. Most people can tolerate silence, but few people can choose it. They speak loudly to drown echo chambers. They crave affirmation so they don't have to hear their own uncertainty. They avoid alone time because it reveals how much they've outsourced identity to others. But here you are choosing solitude deliberately, choosing quiet over codependency, choosing truth over approval. In that sanctuary, you begin to hear two things clearly: the whisper of your own calling and the lies that have kept you multiplied, malnourished, misaligned. You unlearn, they said you needed others to validate your worth. You unlayer, they said rebuilding required a crowd. You unchain, for you to become wholly you must first be willing to stand undisguised in the space where no one applauds. This is deeply uncomfortable because not everyone stays who you let into this sanctuary. Humans are social creatures, but they also shape us in subtle compulsions, expectations, and energetic demands. When you dismantle them, the echo of their presence remains. You may lose friends not out of spite, but because your essence no longer fits their stories. This sanctuary demands boundaries so soundproof that only the voice of your future self can puncture it. And when you choose that kind of silence, you claim an identity not shaped by consensus but by sovereignty. And yet the real transformation unfolds not because of discomfort but through it. Because there is clarity in discomfort if you lean into it. The faster your mind quiets, the more attention you have for what remains true. You stop saying what you think others want to hear. You start saying what your soul needs to say. That requires courage. The courage to say hard things, feel the cost, and still stay invisible. The courage to let your voice steward your mission instead of echo someone else's applause. Here is what living in this sanctuary looks like. You journal at dawn without posting it. You walk, breathe, reflect alone in spaces where you used to crave company. You pause before agreeing to invitations that buffer discomfort. You ask yourself, does this align me with the voice I'm building or dilute it? If the answer is dilution, you say no, even if your old self said yes out of shame, fear, or habit. This is where you discover the honey of your own company. You taste the richness of conviction spoken only to your heart. You build rituals, small, ordinary decisions made in prayer and trust, like saying one sentence of truth to yourself each morning. I am building myself for completeness, not applause. You record it not to memorize, but to feel the weight echo each day. With that repetition, something shifts. Your identity becomes immune to opinion. You no longer say what others expect. You begin to say what the world actually needs. From that sanctuary, your life is reconstructed alone, unhurried, aligned. You learn how to move from your soul, not your crowd. There's grace in solitude. There's art in aloneness. You become someone who speaks with integrity, not urgency, who listens for truth, not popularity, who builds reality silently, then steps into it fully. That is the sanctuary you are reclaiming, and only in that deep solitude can your new identity rise unshakable, unapologetic, undiluted. Now I invite you. What silence will you reclaim today? What boundary will guard your sanctuary? What habit will you commit to each morning so your inner architect aligns with your outer becoming? Write it in the comments for accountability, not performance. Let your silence witness this new rhythm. If this chapter resonated, please share it. Someone you know may fear being alone when their soul is begging to be still. Let them feel permission. Subscribe if you are ready to rebuild your identity, not in the hum of approval, but in the heartbeat of silence. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, your sanctuary becomes your power. Chapter 7. The Weight of Unshared Growth. There is a curious burden that falls when you rebuild yourself alone, the weight of growth that no one sees. You awaken layered with change, new beliefs, sharper boundaries, unwavering conviction, but the world around you still sees the old version. They scan for signs of the person who fit into their story. They expect the former familiar narrative. And until your external image catches up, you carry the unseen weight of growth, a tension between what you now know and what others still expect. This is the invisible crucible of becoming. When your internal evolution outpaces the world's perception, you feel bigger than your reflection. Your heart grows faster than your image. And in that gap lies resistance to yourself and from others. Family questions your distance. Friends critique your absence. Opportunities expect your old self to perform. And in all that you are learning, a hard truth: transformation becomes real only when you carry the burden of your version alone. Most people collapse here. They revert to identity that is easier to show than to explain. They dissolve new convictions into old patterns to avoid friction. But to rebuild truly, you must carry the weight in silence. You must walk out of rooms unchanged by appeasement. You must leave invitations unanswered, not out of pride, but out of sacred sovereignty. Because the real sign of transformation is not visibility. It is consistency. You keep your integrity when it costs approval. It helps to remember that no seed blooms visible until its roots first stabilize in darkness. And no identity becomes undeniable until it first proves itself in solitude. The weight you carry now is not burden, it is ballast. What feels heavy today will anchor your authority later. What you hold in quiet will carry weight when the world finally catches up. But this is not about denial. It is about maturity. You do not hide who you are becoming. You simply refuse to explain it before time. You live in the tension of unseen alignment. You let your silence insist your presence matters, even when the world sees stillness, not structures. You have learned to wait for gravity, not applause. Take note of how your boundaries and values now cost you space. Someone invites the version of you who used to accept. You decline not for spite, but because your inner tribunal now weighs differently. You realize the easier path is not necessarily the aligned one. You feel the pull of nostalgia for relationships that no longer nourish your vision, and yet the voice inside you says, "Better to be higher alone than hindered by the familiar." That is heavy, and it must be held with courage. Still you breathe. You ground yourself in your longest loyalty, the one to your future self. Every morning you remind your soul, what I am building today may look empty to others, but I know it is full. I know it is necessary. And you do the work anyway. You choose silence in conversations when boundaries are tested. You say no to obligations that misalign with your calling. You walk away from validation that costs integrity. You may tire, you may slip, you may question. On those nights, you remind yourself growth that's unshared is still growth. Transformation that goes unacknowledged is still valid. The wait doesn't mean failure, it means evolution. Because when the world catches up, it is what you carry that becomes undeniable. Now I invite you to, what growth are you carrying alone? What belief now, deeper, no longer fits the old version of you? What boundary, once challenged, now must remain unnegotiated? Write your answers in the comments, not for applause, but for anchoring yourself in truth. If this chapter stirred something inside you, share it. Someone you know may feel heavy in silence, believing that growth must be visible to matter. Let them see unshared evolution is still evolution. Subscribe if you are ready to walk unseen growth until the world catches up. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, the weight you carry today becomes the gravity of your becoming. Chapter 8. The Test of Patience. Your journey begins to demand something more than bravery or resolve. It demands patience. True transformation doesn't happen in sudden breakthroughs. It happens in the slow rhythm of disciplined days, repeated small decisions, and invisible progress. Right now, when the old you feels tempting and the new you still feels distant, your greatest ally is not speed, it is steadiness. You are being tested not by obstacles, but by the quiet space between breakthroughs. There is a sacred time in this journey, a season of gestation when nothing seems to move outwardly, but radical alignment is happening inwardly. It is when you read daily declarations without anyone noticing. It is when you protect your boundaries in conversations no one witnesses. It is when you pause before acting in moments of habit, not out of fear, but to honor the person you are becoming. None of it is visible yet, but that is the point. Many abandon themselves in this season because they confuse silence with stillness. They believe that only external change counts, but identity forms in the unseen pauses, not in performance. You are now writing serious living off stage. No audience, no applause, just soul entering formation. And if you can learn patience now, if you can allow your mind and body to align before you announce any shift, you become unstoppable later. But everything built fast collapses fast. Everything built without patience fractures under pressure. Your next version will not sustain without the tensile strength built in the slowest seasons. What makes patience hard is that it triggers the old identity's instinct to skip ahead. If I keep waiting, I will lose traction. I will become irrelevant. That voice belongs to the version of you that spoke for permission, not for emergence. Ignore it, because real attraction doesn't chase dignities, it blooms from rooted presence. Let the crowd think you're quiet. Let them miss the momentum. You are not rushing to be seen. You are building to be remembered. Think of it like planting a seed. The moment you bury it, nothing changes above ground. Days may blend into weeks. It may feel like you made a grave, not a garden. But beneath the surface, life is restructuring. Roots developing, soil responding, small adjustments slowly shaping the emerging shoot. If you dig it up too early to check, you kill it. You cannot rush photosynthesis. You must trust the subterranean work. Likewise, you cannot measure your new identity by weekly followers, external feedback, or immediate transformation. Your standard cannot depend on what happens outside, but you are not dormant. You are cultivating. What you do in silence becomes character. What you choose today creates capacity. Every aligned decision, even when unremarked, is a seed of sovereignty. Still days will test you. You will wake and feel stale. You will whisper to yourself, "My old identity worked. It at least provided something. My new self might be noble, but what if I end up with nothing at all?" That instinct to retreat is real. It comes when progress is not visible. So your test is not whether you start cells, but whether you stay steady when nothing celebrates you. Whether you remember, patience is not obstacle, it is lengthened resolve. A life that lasts must be built on grounded rhythm, not rapid escape. Your discipline now is how future integrity is proven. You install patience by holding your alignment even when the witness is empty. You feed your vision by thinking on purpose when motivation is low. You stay committed in small tasks no one will applaud. You do what's required for the version of you who hasn't shown up yet but would not be denied if they could. So let me ask you, what impatience needs to be crucified in yet? What habit are you willing to hold in quiet practice until your identity matches yourself? What structure will you build today, no matter how slow, to anchor tomorrow? Write your answers in the comments, not as pressure, but as promise. If this chapter landed in your heart, pass it on. There is someone who feels stuck between collapse and creation, certain of what they must build, but tired of waiting. Subscribe if you are committed to the slow work of becoming not too fast success, but lasting substance. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, the biggest test is not when the world notices, it's when the world doesn't. Chapter 9. The Currency of Consistency. There comes a season in every justified rebuild where novelty fades, when the fire burns dull, and doubt stands in front of you like a gatekeeper. This is the moment the old self whispers, "This process is too long. No one will notice. Maybe you were better when you fit in, but this season is not proof of failure. It is the test of consistency." Because the only way to rise from silence, solitude, sacrifice, and redefinition is through one steady step after another. Consistency is the currency of true transformation. Most people collapse early. They start strong. They write declarations. They guard their routines. But inevitably, life happens. People distract them. Pressure destabilizes them. The old habits ring familiar and easy, so they collapse the rebuild before it truly takes form. But identity built fast unravels faster. Real change is not about momentum, it is about maintenance. It lives in the trenches of daily repeat, not the adrenaline of occasional intensity. You are being built by consistency, not by performance. Your real test is not whether you can start. It is whether you can sustain, whether you keep your word to the future version of yourself when no one is watching. When delays grow long, when recognition stays absent, when ease whispers louder than faith. If repetition is the ground they reliably dig into when faith feels thin, that is authenticity. That is gravity. Consider the oak. It does not rise with one storm. It stands through seasons. It bends in tension. It sheds old leaves. It roots deeper in silence. And only then does its size match its identity. Your growth follows the same logic. Greatness without consistency becomes casting powder, not foundation. A smear on the surface. It looks like success, but under pressure it collapses. So what does consistent rebuilding look like? It begins with small choices repeated. Writing a sentence of truth each morning before distraction demands voice. Quietly declining what misaligns. Refusing approvals or small comforts that compromise your standards. Listening to reflecting, recommitting, even when boredom rises. Showing up alone. Speaking to yourself, not to performance metrics. Staying loyal to the process when it would be easier to integrate the old habits again. Yes, there will be days when the old life seems safer, when compliance is easier than creation, when belonging feels warmer than becoming, but those days demand your loyalty most. That is when you choose not to lean backward. You choose the one act of alignment, one boundary upheld, one thought spoken to yourself. Because consistent small moves made in solitude yield unshakable destiny. And yes, this is not flashy. It may never trend. People may stop asking for updates. But strength likes to hide before it stands. And stubborn stays longer than it looks. Anchor now is better than applause later. If you sustain in the small things, larger miracles will root below the level of sight. This rebuilding requires discipline habits designed to anchor your mental, emotional, and physical being. A daily declaration rooted in identity, not aspiration. A daily reflection about one boundary protected, even if it means discomfort. A daily question, what aligned choice did I make today to honor who I'm becoming? But you don't need steps on a poster. You only need presence, not a plan that shapes you, a posture that sustains you. So now ask yourself, which repeating action, if sustained faithfully in silence, would deeply transform your life? What habit, no matter how small, are you willing to commit to, even when distractions plead? What conviction will you show up to today, not for applause, but for alignment? Write your intention in the comments, not performance, but presence. Let this be the moment you shift from occasional intensity to consistent identity. Share this chapter if it resonates. Someone you know may be chasing momentum when they truly need discipline. Let them see that depth doesn't happen all at once. Subscribe if you are ready to operate your life on consistency, not crowd reaction, but internal resolution. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, consistency becomes your true identity, and presence becomes your power. Chapter 10. Reclaiming your voice in quietness. There comes a time amidst the slow building of your character when you realize your voice no longer comes from the old crowd or the old crowd's need. You have stripped away applause and expectation. You no longer speak to fill space. You only speak when aligned. This is the moment you reclaim your voice, not with noise, but with sovereignty. The voice you lost in pleasing others, in repeating who you were taught to be, now emerges from the foundation you built in solitude. It is not an external sound. It is internal gravity. No longer shaped by what others expect, your words now form the architecture of your soul. For too long you might have been speaking for acceptance, for belonging, for familiarity, but now you speak for healing, clarity, and sovereignty. This new voice will cost people. Some will flatter you, others will fight you. They misunderstand because their identity depended on your compliance. But now your voice isn't for them, it is for the calling within you, defined not by validation but by inner authority. Reclaiming your voice begins in silence. It begins by listening to what the new version of you really needs to say. It means refusing to speak for comfort. It means dissolving the shame of early mistakes. It means building trust with your soul until the voice inside you can speak without needing permission. This voice carries space. It doesn't rush. It has learned that clarity overcomes volume, that presence silences doubt, that being anchored is more powerful than being liked. Your words will become fewer but more pointed. Your tone shifts from performance to presence. You no longer need to articulate everything to be followed. Instead, your silence holds weight. You speak not from insecurity but from identity. You actually mean fewer words, but those words mean everything. Every time you clarify what matters most, you reclaim a piece of your soul. Every time you hold your boundary in conversation, you speak maturity into your life. Every time you pause before answering expectations, you echo your future self's voice, not your past conformity. This is not anger, it is alignment. It is not aggression, it is assurance. It is not performance, it is presence. So I ask you, what truth do you now need to speak, not to prove yourself, but to reclaim yourself? What sentence can you speak today that is consistent with who you are becoming, even if no one else hears it? And where will you refuse to speak at all because silence now carries more sovereignty than compliance? Write your words in the comments, not performance but presence. Let your voice reclaim its shape. If this chapter awakened your voice, share it. Someone you know might be straining to duplicate old applause when inner clarity is waiting for their attention. Subscribe if you are ready to speak from alignment and reclaim the voice your soul has been preparing all along. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, you do not just find your voice, you become it. Chapter 11. Living your truth in every season. You have learned to walk in silence. You have embraced solitude. You have rebuilt with discipline. Now the real question becomes, can you live your truth consistently, not just in hidden rituals, but in the full spectrum of life? Can your integrity remain unmoved when the environment changes, easy seasons and difficult ones, public and private, applause and emptiness? Because true rebuilding is not just what you do in the shadows, it is what you are willing to embody in every season of your life. Most people believe authenticity is situational, that they can be real in safe spaces but necessary facade in others. But rebuilding built on borrowed identity collapses under pressure. The new version of you will not survive if it is only a weekend ritual or a siloed identity. It must be rooted deep enough to anchor you rainstorm or sunlight, praise or disapproval, comfort or chaos. The test is not whether you can act like your future self in solitude, but whether you can live like that in the chaos you once ran from. This is where the gap breaks. Most people integrity demands more than belief. It demands behavior alignment when there is opportunity to step backward, when finances tempt compromise, when relationships pressure you to elevate their comfort over your clarity, when your old self's friends invite your participation in an old pattern. Your rebuilt life asks, can you show up as yourself when everything around you calls you to fit in? Can you say no again and again and again without regret? Can you guard your vision when others remind you what you used to be? Living your truth in every season is not rigidity. It is maturity. It is not rebellion. It is self-respect. You begin by determining which core conviction is non-negotiable. That core truth becomes your talisman, one sentence inside you that never wavers. Mine is simple. I build my life through alignment, not approval. That sentence travels with me through applause, argument, or absence. It filters investments, relationships, agreements. It clarifies what conversations to hold tight and which to release. It is not just a mantra, it is a mindset. It is the spine of decisions in every season. But the real challenge is not the statement, it's the daily practice. When public seasons demand compromise, you breathe and ask, will this choice align with my truth or betray it quietly? And when quiet seasons demand absence, you allow silence. Because your presence must be intentional, not habitual. Every moment becomes a loyalty test to the external or to the internal. And every tested choice prepares the next season of visibility with authenticity instead of artifice. Moreover, when seasons shift, when storms rise or opportunities arrive, you learn the art of response, not reversion. You respond to circumstances through your rebuilt standards. You do not absorb the noise. You calibrate your stance. You do not mimic gravity, you become it. Even if no one understands why you speak differently or choose differently, you remain steady. The seasons come and go, but your center stays still. Applying truth in every season also teaches you how to rebuild relationships or let them die. Some people loved who you once were. They assumed your authenticity would be a variation of that, not a renovation. When you reconstruct, there is no guarantee they return. Some will, but on terms that still reflect your future, not their past. Others will drift away. That is okay. Identity-aligned relationships do not need constant explanation. They recognize you. They embrace transformation. They don't fear clarity, they expect it. So here's how to implement truth in every season. Define your non-negotiable truth. Write it once as a statement. Keep it with you. Revisit it weekly. When seasons shift, pressure arises, loss comes, transition begins. Ask privately, what does this truth require of me right now? Make the aligned move. Lean into discomfort. Hold the boundary. Walk quietly or stand still. Whatever the season, act with integrity. Reflect weekly. Where in my week did I bend away from my truth? What can I adjust in the upcoming week to realign? And note some seasons return invites you cannot accept, not by rejection, but because your rebuilt life lives differently now. That discernment isn't bitterness, it is sacred sovereignty. Now I ask you, what truth transcends the seasons in your life? What statement will you live by for every shift, challenge, and change? What one alignment do you refuse to sacrifice, even as seasons shift? Write your truth in the comments, not to perform, but to anchor your becoming. If this chapter spoke to you, share it. Someone you know may fear transformation because they cannot envision living differently through seasons. Let them know survival lies not in fitting leading seasons, but in standing truth in every season. Subscribe if you are committed to living your truth, not when convenient, but always as the identity you rebuilt, demands not as a role you play, but as the life you live. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, the real test is not when you rise publicly, but how you remain true when everything else shifts. Chapter 12. The Power of Invisible Progress. You may not see the changes yet. You may still stand in the mirror and feel unfamiliar eyes behind your own. That does not mean nothing is shifting. Most progress doesn't show on a timeline. It rises beneath the visible world, in habits held, beliefs overturned, boundaries enforced, voice reclaimed. The deepest growth is invisible, and the people who rebuild themselves alone learn to measure breakthroughs by the depth of conviction, not the density of evidence. In overwhelming moments, silence will feel like stagnation. The world moves fast. You stay still. Others chase trends, reinvent their image, search for external validation. Meanwhile, you rebuild internally with subtle, ordinary disciplines, refusing reactive enablement, rewriting internal stories, choosing solitude over spectacle, protecting new boundaries. These choices carry weight not because they perform, but because they persist. And persistence forged in alignment becomes authority. You have entered the realm of transformational patience, where trust is not in signal, but in solidity. You learn that external absence isn't failure, but testimony that you aren't building for spectators. You aren't performing for applause. You're aligning with truth, and that truth often arrives in stealth. That's because the foundation of who you are becoming is constructed one unseen moment at a time. One thought replaced, one truth spoken to yourself, one boundary honored. These are the invisible bricks of destiny. Most people measure progress by the visible likes, promotions, validation. But consistency makers know influence grows when no one is watching. Integrity becomes leadership only when you hold your values in silence, when the pressure rises and your choices stay aligned. That is how you avoid collapse when the world finally sees you. Our inner eyes begin to detect the growth before the world does. You feel it in how your breath responds to tension. You feel it in how your decisions no longer depend on external approval. You feel it in how small moments no longer lead to old habits. You don't hear applause, you hear consistency. The deeper your unseen growth, the less appealing shortcuts become. You no longer chase external signals because you trust the internal process. You no longer chase people who once defined you because you now define yourself. You no longer seek refuge in the familiar, not when the unfamiliar is aligned, because you know growth won't show until it has substance. Still, invisible growth demands constant faith. It tests you when no one notices, when habits hold but milestones feel absent. That is when the old identity begs for validation. That is when the crowd becomes tempting again. That is when ease looks like equity. And you may wonder, am I lost? But that question distracts from the truth you are building. Slowly, honestly, consistently, your unseen work will be revealed through eventual alignment, not because you sought it, but because you honored the conditions. When life finally responds, it will be undeniable, not sudden, not accidental. The identities you didn't speak about now begin to live. So here is your covenant measure, your progress by the silence held, not the applause earned. Reflect weekly on the rituals maintained. Honor each small victory of integrity. The boundary that stood, the delayed gratification honored. The internal thought shifted, the truth spoken without witness. Jot it down. Do not rely on external signals to score your progress, but celebrate the invisible. I invite you now. What part of your development feels most invisible, yet most important? What daily choice will you keep, even when no one else sees its purpose? Write it in the comments, not to show off, but to anchor your perseverance. If this chapter stirred something deep, please share it. Someone you know may feel stuck between destruction and destiny, not knowing that the truth being built in secret now will reveal a strong foundation later. Subscribe if you are ready to speak through actions more than words. If you are committed to invisible progress more than external praise. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, your greatest work may remain unseen long before it becomes undeniable. The Mindset Reset, the penultimate chapter of Destroy the Old You and Rebuild Yourself Alone, written as a direct challenge to your beliefs, decisions, and next moves. There comes a moment after the noise fades, after the rituals settle, after the boundaries are drawn, when you are left with nothing but your standard. No motivation, no inspiration, no external challenge, just a quiet question. What kind of life do I now refuse to live? This is the true mindset reset. It is not about adding more. It is about cutting the cord between who you used to be and who you refuse to be again. And that reset is brutal, because you are not choosing between good and bad. You are choosing between comfort and calling. The old you did not just come from trauma or weakness. It was built from survival, from mimicry, from crowdsourced identity. But now the only voice that matters is the one inside that says no more. No more shrinking, no more explaining, no more managing other people's expectations to the point you lose your own reflection. You are not here to become slightly improved. You are here to become unrecognizable in strength, in standard, in soul. So let us stop pretending this work is casual. This is not lifestyle advice. This is soul surgery. This is your invitation to set fire to the belief systems that were never yours, to smash the mirror held up by others and replace it with your own vision, to decide that you will not betray yourself one more time for the sake of being liked, accepted, praised, or approved. This mindset reset is violent but sacred. It means cutting off access from versions of you that others loved, but which no longer honor your truth. It means forgiving yourself for the lies you lived. It means not asking for permission to rise. And most of all, it means establishing new laws, personal, unbreakable standards for your life, forged in solitude, not adopted from influence. What do you now hold as sacred? Do you still live by the standards of someone who doubted themselves? Or have you finally become loyal to your highest self? Mindset is not just a shift in thought. It is a decision about identity. When everything else gets tested, your finances, your body, your relationships, only your mindset determines what stays and what goes. And if that mindset still carries pieces of the old self, it will default to self-betrayal. That is why you cannot afford a neutral mindset. You need a sacred, fire-tested, unquestioned mindset that defines your actions even when your emotions fail. This reset demands clarity. What am I now unwilling to tolerate? What environments no longer reflect the man or woman I am becoming? What do I now require of myself every day without excuse? These are not motivational questions. They are foundations. If you do not answer them, someone else will answer them for you. And you will find yourself years from now living under a mindset you did not choose. So here is your call. Close your eyes tonight and rewrite your personal code. No more inherited beliefs. No more borrowed identities. No more diluted truth. Replace it all with what you now know to be non-negotiable. Because this is not about healing anymore. It is about honoring who you have become. And if you dare to write it, I challenge you. In the comments, state one standard you are now raising and one belief you are permanently eliminating from your life. Not for performance, for clarity, for conviction. If this reset pierced something in you, send it to someone else who needs to raise their standard before another year passes them by. Subscribe if you are done playing the old mental loop, done with settling, done with pleasing. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, the only thing left to protect is your standard. The final call of destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, the emotional conclusion and ultimate challenge. This is not a summary. This is a call to embodiment. This is it. Not the end of the book, but the edge of your old self. You stand here not just as someone who read about transformation, but as someone who was called to it. You did not arrive here by accident. You arrived here because something inside you refused to stay buried. Something in you knew that the version you were pretending to be could no longer survive. And now the only thing left to do is become. You have destroyed enough. Destroyed the need for validation. Destroyed the addiction to comfort. Destroyed the dependence on being liked. Destroyed the masks, the borrowed scripts, the softened boundaries. You have done the digging. Now comes the fire. Because from this point forward, there is no more hiding behind self-development. No more running back to the comfortable edge of the old identity just because the new one feels heavy to carry. No more waiting for perfect timing or better energy or clearer signs. The moment has already spoken. You heard it. You would not be reading these words if it had not found you. So now you must answer it. This is your final call. You do not get to read another book to avoid becoming this version. You do not get to delay action under the illusion of learning. You do not get to ask for signs that were already sown into your discomfort. You are either becoming or decaying. You are either standing or shrinking. You are either rebuilt or still recycling old dust. There is no neutral. So I ask you right now in your rawest truth, what decision must be made today? What standard will you never again violate? What version of you will now rise not on paper, but in practice? Because this journey was never about theory. It was about identity. And the identity you just spent 14 chapters rebuilding must now live. World. That means standing for what others misunderstand. That means walking alone when people question your silence. That means acting on your alignment when your emotions plead for relief. Do not go back. Do not soften your edge. Do not hide behind waiting to be ready. You are ready now. No one will come to validate it. There will be no applause, no divine booming voice, just this whisper, show me who you are now. That whisper will come when you are tired, when your heart feels numb, when the world tells you the old self would have been easier, when habits call like familiar ghosts. That is when you say, no, I was not rebuilt to return. I was rebuilt to reign. And reign means responsibility. Reign means alignment. Reign means not flinching when the pressure rises, because you did not come this far to soften. You came this far to live awake. Let the world see the new you, not through announcements, but through presence. Let your standards be silent declarations. Let your routine become your declaration. Let your peace speak louder than your performance. And if you fall, you rise without delay. Not because you must be perfect, but because you are owned by purpose, now, not pain. You are the answer to the prayers your past self whispered at 2 a.m. You are the closure to every cycle your family could not break. You are the beginning of a new legacy. Now go. Do not wait. Rebuild in action. Rebuild in breath. Rebuild in presence. And if this journey changed something in you, share it. Someone you love is still buried under applause, codependency, hesitation. Send them this final call. And subscribe if you are ready to live loud the life you rebuilt alone. Because when you destroy the old you and rebuild yourself alone, You do not become someone different. You become who you were always meant to be.